Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Yonatan Ullman.
Good evening, Rami.
How are you?
Honestly, I don't know how to answer that question. We like
So
to have a frame of reference for it.
Okay, so we'll speak about it soon. We are now as part of the series of 2020 online. It's a series that started from just asking the question, what are artists doing right now in different places around the world? How does the COVID situation, social separation affect them, affect their work? We're in partnership on this series with the Lambert Center for Arts and Idea of the JCC Manhattan, and we're now live on Facebook. Today we're speaking with Yonatan Ullman. Yonatan, I will take 2 minutes to introduce you.
By all means, go ahead.
Okay. So Yonatan Ullman is an artist, lecturer, writer, and independent curator based in Tel Aviv. He graduated with honors from the School of Visual Arts, New York, MFA Fine Arts program, and Bezalel Academy for Art and Design, Jerusalem, BFA in Fine Arts. His work has been widely shown in New York, Philadelphia, Miami, London, Berlin, Brussels, and Israel. He earned some prestigious awards like the Paula Rhodes Memorial Award, the London Biennale Painting Award, the Rising Star of Verge Art Miami, and Israel Ministry of Culture Young Artist Award. His work is featured in both private and public collections, and he's now in his Tel Aviv studio to speak with us. So, Yonatan, tell us a little bit, how are things? How are you doing?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for that lovely introduction and for having me speak as part of this series. Yeah, I'm assuming everybody's responding to this new reality a little bit differently. For myself, I have two young daughters, a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, the majority of my time has been spent with the two of them. With whatever little time I have left, I'm still trying to maintain some form of practice. Although I guess we can get more into it as this conversation progresses, but I feel like we're at a time of uncertainty, what we are stepping into, what the world is going to look like, and more specifically, what the art world is going to look like. So it's been very challenging trying to find an efficient way to adjust to this new situation that we're all in.
Yeah, so I remember yesterday, I think we were supposed to set a time to speak a little bit, and I suggested an hour, and you said, no, that's the hour that I'm making lunch for my daughters. So that's like a thing now. You have blocks in your calendar. How is it? Do you like it? You miss full days?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little of both, I guess. I mean, thinking now about my normal schedule prior to everything that's happening now, I would start my days at approximately 6:30 a.m. and would finish them at approximately 1 or 2 a.m. again, and then it would just continue a cycle. So it wasn't a sane schedule to begin with, but a little bit like running long distance. It's like so long as you're in your groove and you're just in this zone and you're running, then you don't feel how tired you are. And it's only after you take a break that you realize, oh, I've been running for a very long time and maybe I shouldn't be doing this, or maybe I should rethink about my running habit. So I feel it's a little bit like that, where it's an opportunity to reflect upon what type of life we were living prior to these times. And certain aspects I certainly miss, other aspects not as much. Yeah, so I guess that's where it meets me.
Well, people ask me with the series, why did you make all the conversation live on at 9 p.m. Jerusalem time? It's a bit old. It's a bit late. I'm sorry. And you know, the answer is there's two reasons. One is we want our partners from East Coast, West Coast to be able to join us. And then the second, I think even more important reason is that the children are asleep
Right.
at the time. So we're all at home and it's quiet now, so we can get like this hour to really speak. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on right now in Tel Aviv? Like, where is the quarantine or social distancing right now in a general way?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to my experience, and I feel like like many of the other Tel Avivans, are very much confused about what we are supposed to be doing and what we're not supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So there's an aspect of social distancing. People are still, for the most part, staying at home, and are still, for the most part, not taking part in public events of any type. But things have begun to loosen up more and more. And in response, people have begun to loosen up more and more as well. So you're seeing more people out, you're seeing more crowds, you're seeing less people wearing masks, less people wearing gloves, less people washing their hands every time when they step outside. People converging closer together. There was a point in time where if a person were to step into your 2-meter radius zone, you'd be like freaking out about it. And I'm feeling like there's less of that now. Still though, schools have only partly started for my children, which are younger and going to daycare. Daycare hasn't officially started yet and will only begin to start next week. So it's far from having like a normal routine, or from there even appearing to be an horizon for a normal routine yet.
So we're 2 months in the quarantine since the whole thing started. And I want to use the opportunity to speak with you like a few minutes about differences between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. So, you know, so far we had about 10 speakers. Every speaker comes from a different country. And when I wanted to like have the Israeli representative, I thought, okay, so it's Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And I said, okay, why not have both? Because it's a bit different perspectives, I believe. Just as an example, like the ground shook, was shaking in Jerusalem when people could not go to pray in the synagogue in a minyan. I think the ground shook in Tel Aviv when people cannot go to the beach or cannot sit in a coffee place. So
yeah, the coffee was our
the coffee is more.
That was the breaking point for sure. People lost their mind. Until then, it was basically, I can still go. I can get my coffee outside.
Yeah, but can you tell us a little bit about how was the differences feel from the Tel Aviv part?
Yeah, I mean, I had experience, my undergraduate, I studied at the Bezalel Academy for Arts and Design, which is located in Jerusalem. And so I actually lived in Jerusalem for approximately 4 years around the time when I was doing my BFA. And I remember originally, I'm from a smaller city outside of Tel Aviv called Rehovot, which is basically a secular city, or for the majority of secular city, or at least the parts of the city that I lived in. And so I wasn't prepared for what Jerusalem was going to be. And I think immediately you just feel a different type of atmosphere and a different type of feeling when you enter the city. And if you walk around the city, certainly living there is a different experience. I felt it's a very judgmental city. It's a city that you can't just be yourself, that you're yourself in relation to approximately 3,000 years of history that this city carries. And it's in every stone that you step on, you sort of feel that. And so it has a very different appeal and very different atmosphere. I should say the more time I spent living there, the more I began to appreciate the it's almost a spiritual experience, even without having a religious relationship with the city. Still today, as part-time work, I teach at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem and another school in Jerusalem. So I travel back and forth quite frequently. And I always have this feel when you're just going up towards Jerusalem that it's this sort of almost spiritual ascending, even without it being related specifically to religious experience. So
maybe that's the right time to show and speak a little bit about the work that you've been presenting as part of the Jerusalem Biennale 2019. Can you see the images now?
Yeah, we're seeing them. At least I am.
Okay, great. So this is the beautiful, beautiful building of the Polonsky Academy in Jerusalem as part of the Van Leer Research Institute. And you were part of a group exhibition curated by Vera Pitbull. And I want to show those two works, this one and this one you presented in the upper floor. And then there was another series, but we'll speak about it maybe after. So can you tell us a little bit about those works?
Yeah, so the works that I ended up showing at the Jerusalem Biennial are part of a large series that I've been working on approximately since 2015. And I would say that it's just until recently, I was still working on this same series. They're all named under the title Proposals. And the work we're looking at now is part of a sequence of works, which has a complicated name called A Proposal for a Monument to Myself as I Wish to Be Remembered. And throughout this sequence, what occurs is there is a monumental sculpture depicting my own image, assuming the position of Michelangelo's David, or maybe to some extent Rodin's The Thinker. And over the course of time, what inevitably happens is that the breaking point or the weak point of the sculpture begins to tumble more and more until the sculpture gradually collapses and then ends up tumbling and crashing to the floor. The last image in this sequence is the one that we're looking at now, where we can see this shattered sculpture with the head that had been beheaded, looking back towards its own decapitated body or its own debodied experience.
And the kind of the same concept, but with a different example, was presented in this work,
Right.
which is basically a bull that also was captivated.
Yeah, I think going into making this work, I'd looked at a lot of references of a lot of different images of ox that have been depicted throughout our history. And I was surprised to find out how often this animal has been depicted by humankind, dating back all the way back to ancient cave paintings and all the way through modern time to Picasso. It's a reoccurring image. And obviously coming from a Jewish tradition and Jewish background, it called to mind the golden calf. And so there were a lot of different associations going into it. And I thought about this specific moment in the biblical tale where Moses encounters this image for the first time and is appalled by it and is shocked by it. And it's the opposite of what he thinks is the monotheistic way of understanding the spiritual experience of God. And so the sculpture ends up getting broken. And I guess this was my interpretation for it in a way. Yeah, we can get more into this as the conversation progresses, but I feel like I wouldn't say that I'm a prophet, but I would say that a lot of these works foresee some catastrophe, which is inevitably going to happen. And I think that was part of my interior feeling while making these works. Even without COVID-19 or without this pandemic, I'm not certain that things were so great to begin with. If anything, I felt like we were at a tipping point, or at a point where we were about to collapse, regardless of this global pandemic. It's just a manifestation of something which would have otherwise happened in a different, or manifested in a different way, but certainly required some rethinking about who we are, where we are, what we want to be as a society. And I felt like this group of images, in a way, was my attempt to try to cope with this, or to understand this better.
It's funny because, you know, now thinking back, I remember talking with a few artists that were stating the same feeling of something like is exceeded, something is like maybe out of balance and about to be changed dramatically, even way before the COVID started. So this image of the bull, also you have some versions with gold, but I want to keep on going and think about this series that you presented in the lower floor of the bandir, which is basically all the Aleph Bet, but with a very special way to install it and refer to it. It's like a long corridor, and you start the journey with the Aleph Bet, not from Aleph, but rather from the Bet. You start with Bet and you go all the way until you meet why, like in the end of this journey, the Aleph, which is separated from the rest of the letters. Can you say something about the series and the choice to install it like that?
Yeah, I guess I'll start just by saying off the bat, I'm one of the type of artists who make work in their studio and then pursue to find a space where they can show the work. And oftentimes the space doesn't necessarily match the work, or vice versa. And the Van Leer Institute was a case where I felt like the architecture of the space and the conceptual connotations that the space brings to mind could not have been a better fit for my work, or my work couldn't have been a better fit for the building, whichever way you want to see it. In this specific case, this corridor that we're looking at leads towards the window that we're seeing now close to where the camera is taking the photograph from, is the entrance to the library. So it's this hall of knowledge, which is in this philosophical center. And in that sense, I felt like it was a fantastic fit between the work and between the place where the work was exhibited. So the work itself was a series that I made in my studio. And when I began making it, the intent was to have a type of dictionary, or a type of encyclopedia, or a type of bank of all the letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And the original thought was that occasionally when I would be called upon to show work in one exhibition or another, I could pull certain letters out of my bank, and I could create a word that would fit whatever exhibition it was that I ended up showing in. And that didn't end up happening. I had these letters in my studio for maybe a year and a half, or almost 2 years. And then the next thing that happened was that at a certain point, I set all the letters up in sequence from Aleph and until Taf. And looking at all of these letters together suddenly made sense to me. Suddenly that became the work. Suddenly I understood that the potential to say anything using these letters was the work. Now we come to the grand finale of this work, which is what you began from. Eventually, when the work is shown, it's shown starting the second letter of the alphabet, starting Bet and not starting Aleph. And the first letter of the alphabet is depicted in a different manner than all the other letters, and seems to not connect directly to the rest of the alphabet. And the reason for that, and here we're getting a little bit into politics, but when I had this bank of images, or this bank of letters in my studio, there was a point in time where our Minister of Culture at the time, Miri Regev, had proposed a new law, which was called the Loyalty in the Arts Law, and was through this law, she would be able to take away, or the government would be able to take away funding from any project they deemed not loyal to the state. I wasn't the only artist. There were several artists who grouped together to protest against this law. And in this specific protest, what artists did was take works of theirs and physically burn the work. I decided to partake in this protest exhibition or this protest work. And in this protest, I decided what I want to do is extract a piece of the work that you would feel is missing. And so I took a work that had the depiction of all of the alphabet, or the alphabet, which is one of the first things you learn at school, and the means by which we communicate, and is a unifying factor throughout all of the state of Israel, certainly the Jewish parts of it, and to extract its very core, its very beginning. And the more I studied and the more I understood the significance of this letter, the typography of it became significant as well. We're looking at the image now. You can see that there's a diagonal line that crosses from its bottom part to its top part, somewhat equivalent of the David's cross, where you have a triangular form pointing upwards and a triangular form pointing downwards, connecting between heaven and between earth. And in this case, the title of the exhibition was also Not in Heaven, so it also fit very well into the concept that Vera had for the entire exhibition.
Yes, so Vera Pilpul curated the exhibition, as we said, but then you mentioned before something, and I wonder if this is an image that was part of the performance of against the loyalty law?
While the protest was taking place, there was a lot of documentation of the things taking place there, and this is one of the images that was taken during that documentation or during that protest. This work, this alphabet, this aleph through taf, this full alphabet of the Hebrew alphabet, has been exhibited several times. And in one of the opportunities when it was exhibited, and this image was used to promote the show. I still think or feel that this can work as a work just in itself, or can work as an image just in itself. And in the case of the exhibition that was taking place at the Van Leer Institute, we decided not to incorporate this specific photograph into the sequence of works that we had depicted in the, or that we had exhibited at the exhibition, but rather to leave this as a sort of open interpretation for why is it that the aleph is missing, and to sort of leave it as an open question.
So maybe we'll get back a little bit to like politics in relation with the COVID and whatever happens, but I want to get back to what you said before about this feeling in 2019 that everything is like exceeding. It's something which is, I think many of us felt it in 2019, people that are involved in the art world. And I think probably the most significant event that took place that maybe represented this whole phenomena of feeling that the art world is exceeding was connected to the art market, a work by Da Vinci that was sold in the mid-2019 for a record of $450 million. Okay, so now we're watching this masterpiece, which is a masterpiece, but $450 million sounds today like unbelievable.
Yeah, I'll tell a little bit of the backstory behind this specific work, which is an interesting backstory. It is known that Leonardo da Vinci himself painted the image of Christ as the savior of the world. There's a documentation about him making a work called Salvator Mundi, which is the name of this work. This specific work came up at auction at Louisiana in someplace rural, missing the word, like the rural, like Christie's and Sotheby's, which are like auction
houses.
Very rural auction house. and was sold for a very low amount. And people who bought it later brought it to a restaurator, which began to examine it more and more. And there began to become more and more reason to believe that this is the actual original work made by Leonardo da Vinci. It hasn't been decisively proven yet, but there is good reason to believe that this is the original image that Leonardo da Vinci painted. There are good reasons to believe that it's not as well, but we won't get into that entire discussion. One way or the other, this work, arguably by Leonardo da Vinci, finds its way to a major auction house during 2019, and as you mentioned, becomes the most expensive work ever sold by a living or non-living artist, when it sells for $450 million, which is just an extraordinary amount, which is just to put it in comparison, the last movie made by the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Avengers Endgame, which is the most expensive film ever made, cost approximately as much as this one painting. So that's just to put things into proportion. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you were saying, that this feeling of excess and this feeling of capitalism, which had lost any restraint and which has lost any constraint, and which is heading in a direction that felt like it was inevitably going to collapse and was inevitably going to crash, is one that I think many people shared even prior to everything that's happening now. And like you were saying, many other artists have dealt with this same subject.
Let's see.
Yeah. So I'll say, go back to the first image just for one more moment, please.
Okay.
So on his one hand, you can see it's held up and he's doing this motion. It's a blessing motion, which is significant and which signifies as above, so is below. And his other hand is holding this orb in it. This orb has been the topic of numerous debates, starting from optical questions of if this were an actual orb, would the light fracture through this glass semi-transparent sphere in the way that it's being depicted here. And it's well documented and well known that Leonardo da Vinci himself had studied optics, and so there's no reason to believe that this would be a mistake. But if this were a full form made of glass, then the image depicted in the back of it should have been reversed, should have been upside down. And this is known through basic optics today, and this is not the case there. So it's been the topic of a lot of debate. And then we can see these three dots, which are at the center, more or less, of the orb, which appear like they're reflecting from the outside of the image that we're looking at. And there's a good question of what those three dots represent. Is it Orion's belt? And there's a lot of different speculations about that as well. And so this orb has been the topic of hot debate. And I myself became very interested in it and became very interested in the image as a general image as well. And decided I want to make my own sort of take of this, of the Solvator Mundi. And so I began with the orb. You can move now to the next image. And I started to play around with how can I create an orb that would create this sort of weird sort of temporal void that wouldn't be exactly two-dimensional and wouldn't be exactly three-dimensional and would look somewhat like one of our eyes or maybe one of our eyelids. And so this is, we can see now a work in process. So we can see now my beginning to work on it, and then yeah, we can go back. Yeah, let's go to the next one then. Yeah. And so I implanted that into the Solvator Mundi, and then you can see in the original image the orb is just laying on top of his hand. I created it a little bit more hovering above his hand, since yeah, like gravity is a topic that I deal with and with my work quite frequently, and floating objects is one that I'm specifically interested in. And so I made the orb, rather than rest on his hand, sort of hover above his hand. And then somewhat like I did with Michelangelo's David or with Rodin's The Thinker, the thought was to implant my own image into this very well recognized or very well known image. And so we can go to the next image now. I had a photo session maybe a year or so ago where I was working with a lot of gold leaf, and I was gilding a lot of objects in my studio using gold leaf. And so to promote those works, we had a photo shoot in my studio where I myself was painted in gold. And so I had this image from a previous photo shoot, used this image and implanted that one into the image of the Solvator Mundi. So you can go to the next one now, we'll be able to see it. So you can see now original image and my image overlaying one on top of the other. Mm-hmm. Go to the next image now and we'll see that I take away the original image and I only use my image. We'll see now that the proportions between the hands and between my own face don't make sense here. The hands seem too small in relation to the face. And so we'll see now the next phase or next step where another thing that I thought of at the time is that I'd like for the face to read in a sort of weird way where it's hard to tell exactly the age of the person. Mm-hmm. So I used AI technology, artificial intelligence technology, and I implanted my image into this artificial intelligence technology, which is able to age your own image. And so now we can see my aged image, and now I've implanted that aged image into the young image of myself. And now you can see it's a little hard to tell exactly what age is the person that you're looking at. If you're looking at the right-hand side of the image, he looks older than he does on the left-hand side of the image. And so it becomes sort of ambiguous. Second thing I did, you can see the hands have been enlarged to fit the proportions of the face. Mm-hmm. Now there's minor things. It seemed to me like the blessing hand seems detached from the body. So I wanted to have a better cast shadow for that hand. So we can see the next phase now. Likewise, one of the strong arguments for why this image is an original Leonardo da Vinci is what's called in Italian pendimento, which comes from the word regret in Italian. And when they scanned the original image using infrared and ultraviolet light, what they began to see is that the thumb had been painted twice, had been painted in one position. Then whoever painted the image regretted having painted it in one position. And when he looked at the final image, decided that he needs to move the thumb a little bit over to the right or a little bit over in its position. And so here you can see a sort of ghost image of where that thumb used to be located, which is also true for the original image.
I wonder if there's like a connection probably from Latin, pandema and pandemic.
Oh, interesting. I didn't
just thought about it.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know either. Yeah, like there's a lot of regret in our times. So yeah, maybe that makes sense as well.
But then I'm asking, like, you know, in every artwork, there's the creator and there's the creation, mm-hmm. and you implant yourself not as Da Vinci, but rather as Jesus Christ, right? It's like, and you said before he was the savior. He was like, so right. Was that something that you thought of, that you were willingly trying to
yeah, I guess I became like obsessed with the image itself without so much thinking about the interpretations or the meaning of it. Mm-hmm. And so I guess only when I finished making the image and I'm now thinking about either creating it in like a physical form or exhibiting it, and suddenly it struck me, wait, like this is weird, like I'm of Jewish descent and I'm posing as Jesus Christ. And so something about that became sort of strange to me. I guess while working on it, my main motivations or my main trains of thought were that this is very strange times. And if there's any type of message that I feel like I can send or that I can get behind, it's a message of hope. And so I felt about this Jesus Christ as a figure of resurrection and as a figure of hope and as a figure of forgiveness. I felt like that was sort of a relevant image in one way or another. And only when I finished working on it, it really struck me, wait, do I really want to take that burden on my shoulders, I guess.
Mhm.
And so I'm still debating that at the moment. We're actually seeing a work which might never get more made than what we're seeing now. So we'll have to see.
But basically, just about the medium, it's basically something that you would see as a print, as a photography.
It's a good question. I've previous work of mine, I've worked on Photoshop in a similar manner to what I've shown now, and then I've been able to use that Photoshopped image to eventually create a sculpture or a picture or an image or a painting of one type or another. So my initial thought that this would be the same thing, that I would just be making this image as a preparatory drawing towards making a relief or a sculpture or whatever. But the more I worked on the digital image, and the more, or the further we went into this global pandemic, where the digital realm had become more and more of the obsolete, or the only realm that still seems viable or still seems possible, then the more I began to think about this work just being, that's the finished form of it. And then should it be depicted as a video work on a video monitor, or should it be printed, is a question that I'm still pondering and debating. So we'll see. Right, so for those of us not living in Israel or don't know about this, the Tel Aviv Museum of Art is currently having, or currently has, a major exhibition of Jeff Koons, all works which were loaned to the museum from a private collection. And within this private collection is this specific work that you can see me photographed next to, which just until recently was the most expensive sculpture ever sold, or the most expensive sculpture sold by a living artist. It's a work by Jeff Koons called Balloon Dog, and has several versions. This is the orange version of it. And that one sold in 2015 or 2016, if I'm not mistaken, for $58 million or some ridiculous sum like that. Which obviously, when you encounter the work, begs the question of what is it about this work that justifies paying $58 million for it, and what is it like standing in front of a piece that's valued at $58 million. This exhibition was obviously intended to be a very hyped exhibition. It was obviously intended to be an exhibition that would be highly visited, and that the majority of the population living here in Israel, which often don't get the opportunity to see a Jeff Koons firsthand, would have the opportunity to do that. And then just as we were about to kick off the opening event for this exhibition, the global pandemic went into high gear, and what would have otherwise been a very highly attended opening that was very difficult to get tickets to, even though the tickets were free, it was very difficult to book tickets to it, became an event where this was basically what it looked like, is what you're seeing here in the photo. It was basically me and works by Jeff Koons. And the museum is actually physically closed down. So now there's a $58 million sculpture just sitting there at the museum, waiting for the museum to reopen for people to come see it. And so again, speaking about this excess and about this collapse and about this tipping point and about this, I mean, it's almost like a perfect metaphor for everything that's happening around us at this current time. Is just this one image, or this image representing such a phenomenon in such a moment.
Yeah, I think it is symbolic. But the question is, if we're already there, do you think it's a temporary fall down, and the art world will climb back to maybe close to where it was, or do you think something fundamental changed because of COVID? Because I think, relatively speaking, in these days, I'm much more optimistic than let's say 2 weeks ago. Seems like life in other fields are kind of getting back to normal, and with some restraints, but the art world, you think it's a hit that will stay with us?
Obviously hard to predict, and really depending on how long this continues to last. There's obviously a lot of concern about there being a relapse now that things are beginning to reopen, and that the spread of the pandemic will just enhance now that regulations have become less strict. So it's extremely difficult to predict and extremely difficult to say. I hope to think that certain aspects of what the art world used to maybe glorify or used to almost almost in a religious way follow. I mean, money, I guess, would be the core aspect of it. I mean, I don't think that art is about money, and I always think that conversations about money make art the least interesting conversations about art that have had to do with art and money. And so I hope to think that something about that will change. If, to be honest, I highly doubt it. I think there's too much vested interest in keeping the situation as is, and people in positions of power prefer for it to stay this way. And so if I have to be perfectly honest, I would say that I'm highly pessimistic that anything significant will change.
Mm. Just to say that I think in about 2 weeks, the museums are supposed to be back, so everyone can go and enjoy this Jeff Koons exhibition.
Yeah, well.
I don't know what was the plan, how long would it last, but probably there's a good chance they will extend it. So now I think it's a good time to go to your work process and to think about what gives you inspiration and what are the kind of images that you're looking at when you work. You sent me quite a lot of images that are kind of your bank images, like it's very varied and very different than each other, but it gives some kind of a feeling what you're looking at when you're working.
Right, so let's, before you start moving along, I'll just say a word about this image. Circular form of broken columns. So to me, that reads almost like a clock, and the broken columns almost read like the different dials on a clock, on an analog clock. And time and clocks are things that I've had multiple relations with in my work. That's a continuous sort of theme in my work, or a common thread throughout my work. And so, I don't know, looking at this image, this place where a physical manifestation of something is also can read as a clock, it's something that I guess spoke to me. And I will also say, I don't actively go to pursue images, so it's not so much that I'm looking up like on Google Images and I'm trying to find a specific image. It's more that as I'm scrolling through Facebook, or as I'm watching a YouTube video or whatever, then I'll stumble across an image and I'll stop the video or stop the scrolling, and I'll bank it or put it in like storage. And I guess another thing that began to happen was that the order that these images are placed in is quite random, because it's just whenever I encounter this image, it adds onto the bank.
This is Matisse, right? If I'm not mistaken.
And this is a very late stage in his career where he was suffering from, if I'm not mistaken, Parkinson, and had a very hard time controlling his hands. And so he still was very passionate about making art. Here you can actually see he's sitting at the bed and unable to do very much. But he's so passionate about the need and desire to continue to make art that through whatever means. So he used scissors to make all these cutouts, which have become super famous and very well characterized with him. You think about him and you think about those works. And I just loved him sitting on the bed here and continuing passionately to want to draw. And this specific point also is a circle that has this two sort of lines in it, which almost reads like a clock. And so in a way, when we move from the first image to this next image, like two of them sort of read to me somewhat the same, even though I'm assuming an external viewer might not see the connection as well as I do, or the same connection that I do.
So I'm just like going through some. So basically, you're sitting in the studio and you're going over images and you find images that struck you, and then what? Then what happens?
Yeah, it's even less so when I'm in the studio. This is just all the time. I say almost often about artists that I feel like it's a job that you never stop working at, that you're continuously looking for inspiration, and you're continuously thinking about the next work that you're going to be making. And so one of the things that I've started to do over time is just to stop restraining myself about what the type of images that I collect are. And if it catches my attention for a long enough time, then I'll save it. And I don't know that these will necessarily translate one-to-one to become a work of mine later on. It's more that this is some type of inspiration board. Like, I don't know, I see a very clear connection between these and between the work that I make, even though even if it's not one-to-one, like this image is one that I ended up making into a work of mine, but just themes that occur in these images are ones that I feel like are the major themes in my work as well.
Do you feel like in the last couple of months your triggers have changed? Like, what triggers your thought, your ideas, your imagination? Like the images you select now to keep and maybe put in your library, have they changed?
Trying to think about that question. I would say probably not so much. I'm not very much like an artist who responds to anything particular which is happening in the external world. For the most part, my work develops from my work. So I finished making what I considered like a body of work, or finished working on a certain group of works which I feel I can work together. And then I normally reflect upon those works and think about what the next logical step would be. So if to demonstrate that through work that we've spoken about during this conversation, we had an image of my own monumental sculpture tumbling and falling to the ground. And I had a long time struggling about what can you do next? Like, it's such a full stop. It's such a period at the end of the sentence that I didn't know how to continue writing the next paragraph after that. And so in that sense as well, the Solvator Mundi being like the resurrected image of Christ sort of made sense to me within a certain lineage, or within a certain inherent lineage within my studio work. And so it's never so much a response to the external world. I guess sometimes when I look at my work as a general statement, like we were saying throughout this conversation, this feeling of collapse or this feeling of tumbling is one that you can't find a political reading to, but you could to the same extent maybe find a reading for that in my own personal life. I think the time I started working on these images was approximately the time that my second daughter was born. And at the time I felt like where my life was pretty patched together to begin with, and her being born, just everything collapsed and everything tumbled all at once. And so you can find different readings for what the rationale is or what the reasoning is for why I choose to do one thing or another. And
one thing that I found in the images, and I think there's quite a lot of them, is an artwork, but including the image includes the viewer, like some kind of a response, some kind of a relation between the viewer and the artwork, like this one that we see right now. It's not only the artwork that is on the wall, but also this youth, which is falling asleep in the gallery.
Yeah, I mean, this image, just to, for full disclosure, this is an actual artwork by an artist different than myself. Her name is Iris Mishri. Photo that we're seeing in the background is a work by Barbara Kruger, who's an artist considered part of the picture generation. Okay. And Iris Mishri went with her family to see art in general. And when her son was very little, he fell asleep once at one of the museums that they went to together. And she took a photo of him sleeping next to an artwork, which she at the time didn't think would even become a work of art. But over time, as her son matured more, it became sort of a collaborative project between the two of them, where he would pretend to sleep in front of artworks and she would photograph him sleeping there. And just to give the punchline, because he ended up dying in a horrific accident. And so suddenly this aspect of death and life and this museum that preserves a sort of dead body inside it became obviously a very horrific reading for a work that otherwise might have been playful or might have had other readings to it. And so there's a whole sort of story behind this one image, but certainly part of what I was interested in was the relationship between viewer and between artwork. And in this specific case, what reads is a person sleeping in front of an artwork.
And this is another example.
Yeah,
very famous one from recent.
Right. Super recent. Yeah, this is Kara Walker showing at the Tate Modern. This work is still up at the Tate Modern. If the Tate Modern is even open or not, I don't even know. Yeah, we can move on to the next image because there's another image. Okay, yeah, I felt like these two in a way sort of connected to me with one another, even though they weren't intended in any way to connect with one another. But one work is a work by an Israeli artist called A Boy from South Tel Aviv, which is exhibited at the Israel Museum, part of their permanent collection. It's a work by Ohad Meromi. And the previous work is by Kara Walker. And I just felt like something about the blackness, about either of these and the relationship to being black was interesting. Here you can just see this hands is another recurring theme that I often come back to in my work. So you can see here a relationship to one hand, and in the next image you'll see the hand from the Statue of Liberty, and somehow about this liberty and about American dream, about anyone can make it, as opposed to the previous image that we were looking at, where if you look at the actual condition in any place in the world, it's not actually true that anyone can make it, or that not everybody has the same probability to make it.
So picking in your brain in this endless connotation chain, right? It's like one thing led to another. This is also, is this recent? Like talking about the fact that the museums are now empty, or?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly when I took this image. I think not. I think this is just the pre-opening of something where this person who's taking the photograph actually uploaded this image talking about how privileged she was to be able to have a viewing of the Mona Lisa without anyone else there. I myself went to see the Mona Lisa once in my life, and like everybody else, ended up seeing just the backs of everybody who were taking her photograph.
Yeah, that's a regular story.
Right, rather than see the image itself. And I guess we've spoken about the Salvator Mundi, and it's already been declared as the male version of the female Mona Lisa. And so I'm also having thoughts in my head about making myself as a female image and not so much as a male image. And that connects to me to Marcel Duchamp and a lot of other artists who have played around with their own gender and their own sexuality. Yeah, so like you're saying, like a lot of times I have a lot of sort of train of thought about these works in my head. This is an Anstam Kiefer work, and this is just a person laying in front of that work, which to me looked a little bit like the Iris Nishri work, which we were talking about earlier.
But so different, because this is like more closer to the worship that we saw before than the falling asleep one. But
right,
yeah, that's the one.
I have some of my own works where I've photographs of myself laying in front of the work, or holding the work, or hugging the work, or like a bodily relationship to the work. And so you can see in the reference images a lot of these. This one I actually took from you. You actually uploaded this to Facebook.
Yeah, I saw it. I saw the original. It wasn't a gallery or a museum. It was a private collection, and you know, it was kind of striking me.
Yeah, I saw this. I saw you upload this in close proximity to when I was showing the letters at the Jerusalem Biennial, and letters here and my own letters sort of seemed to me to connect in one way or another. Here you can also see the word, the letter Aleph and the letter Lamed next to each other, which spells El, which is the Lord, or spells Lo, which is no. And so this random sort of shattering of letters also has these readings that you can read into them.
Yeah, and down below it's like the combination creates Shema Israel.
Shema Israel, yeah.
Yeah, so we have just a few more minutes to speak about maybe recent work that you are now working on. So let's go there. Let's go there and see. So are you really finding the time to work now? Finding the capacity, the mental capacity?
Yeah, so the past 2 months have been really difficult. Both anybody who has kids would know this. Spending a full day with your children doesn't leave a lot of mental space to do anything else or time to do anything else. Now the regulations have become a little less strict, and we're seeing a little bit more. I'm having a little bit more studio time. Yeah, so here again, this is probably one of my favorite all-time sculptures. I wouldn't be probably the first or last person to love this sculpture. This is for people who aren't familiar with it, one of the very early depictions or one of the early sculptures. This is maybe from 30,000 years ago to 50,000 years ago. It's hard to date it, obviously, but it depicts a female figure. And I guess recently I've been feeling like I have a lot of male figures in my work and not as many female figures in my work. So I felt like I wanted to incorporate some more female figures into my work. And so I'll show this. Yeah, so it's a work in process, but or progress. But yeah, I started from looking from an actual sculpture made by an actual cave person approximately sometime between 30,000 and 50,000 years ago. I was actually surprised when I saw the original image. I never knew the size of it, but it's 11 centimeters. This is the size of the work that I'm holding in my hand now is actually the same size of the work from 30,000 years ago, or from that sculpture from 30,000 years ago. Yeah, I haven't really thought this fully through yet. I don't really know what I want to do with it yet. I was just really intrigued in making it at first. Again, I was very surprised and very taken back by its size. And I think in relation to, you can see like behind me, just a monumental size piece. And so I guess the relationship between, just culturally speaking, between like making very small work and making very large work was something that I was interested in, and trying to see how my body reacts when it's working on such small scale as opposed to such monumental scale. Maybe I also grew tired of working in such large scale as well, who knows.
I think we spoke about the trying to address very shortly like the political situation. Do you want to share with us like a little bit about your point of view? What happens in Israel, like socially and politically?
Yeah, I should say in advance, I feel like I'm in no way an authority on this matter, just my own personal feeling. But I'm concerned, for sure, I'm concerned. I guess my main point for concern is that this whole system that we built, this whole system called democracy, this whole electoral system that we have, it only works if you trust that the people that you're electing will work in your best interest. And recently, I don't know how recently, but recently I've been feeling like the main motivation for politicians in Israel is to keep their own position rather than look out for the position that they were assigned for. And so it's become politicized in a way that is raising a lot of concern, including a situation, for those of you not familiar with Israeli politics, we have a prime minister who allegedly committed a lot of crimes and is under investigation, which raises almost ethical question if a person who's under so much scrutiny, is even fit to rule in office. And certainly it raises a lot of concern. So yeah, not good in my personal opinion.
And my next question would be like, you know, if art has any connection with the social, with the politics. And then I think you already gave me an answer before, because you described this act of protest that you took part of. And, you know, it's not, I don't think it's such a granted thing, like to be socially involved is hard for artists, but to be politically involved and to take a stand, it's really something that I think everyone should appreciate.
I mean, I'll say for myself that that specific political response isn't like a typical response for my studio practice. It's normally more within itself, or has its own sort of thing to offer. Like I relate more to artists like Donald Judd, whose work, it's not political in any way. For those of you not familiar with his work, if you have to reduce it to a sentence, then he's an example of minimalism, although he would reject that notion. And his work is basically pure forms, like pure boxes, pure rectangles, pure geometric shapes. And I guess his argument is that the very encounter with these ideal forms brings to question your own form, if you are able to match up the ideal of these forms that you're encountering. And so I guess in a way, I think about my work as very well thought through, as very assertive, as very retained. And I feel like these are values that I try to depict through my work rather than respond to a specific event in one way or another. And so it's more of an aesthetic proposal than it is a response to one specific thing or another. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Like the influence would be definitely in a deeper level, in a more subtle way, in a more, you know, working on the underlying streams of society and not directly addressing some issues that are, you know, political. It makes a lot of sense to me. Does anyone have a question for Yonatan in the few minutes that we have left?
I have a question.
Okay.
So Nava?
Yes. Hi there, shalom, shalom.
Hi, Nava.
First of all, thank you so much for such a lovely talk and share your processes and work with us. I have a question about the depiction of Aleph in your work. Aside from these references that you brought, I was thinking about if you have any connection or reference. So you've been thinking about, you know, the Aleph is a symbol that represents ideas of simultaneity. If we go back to references like Louise Borges talking about the Aleph, in which it's a point in time you can see all the places at the same time. And I found it very, very interesting, the location of the work in terms of where you decided to place the work in relation to your thought processes in your studio, thinking whether your work would be fit in a place and in relation to Aleph, as well as in relation to this point in time when we are in such a liminal time where we are, all of us, experiencing life simultaneity. We are in this few places at the same time, which I find this idea very much connected to the Aleph. So I was thinking if you have any thoughts about, you know, because, you know, time is one of your materials, so you will be able to reflect on it later on. So I was thinking if there's any relation to the idea of Aleph, the idea of Aleph in relation to our current time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to answer your question the best I can, like I have a wish to be able to like see from a better perspective, like a divine perspective, one that can see like everything and every frame of time and every alternate timeline, like as one. And I think again, the aspiration behind the Aleph has somewhat to do with that. And if you actually look at the way that the letter developed, topography of the letter, originally it was an ox's head, and then that head was beheaded with this strong diagonal line, and that created the Aleph. And so it's this motion or this movement between what to me represents this unrestrained capitalism or unrestrained pursuit of material goods in favor of pursuing a more spiritual or a more deeper understanding of the world. And so in the way those things correlate to me or sort of relate to me, or I guess maybe another image that comes to mind, very famous image by Leonardo da Vinci that has the Vitruvian man, the man who's standing with his hands in two different positions. And looking at this image more and more, I had this thought that maybe he's not depicting one image in two separate situations, but just over time, like this person is moving his hands up and down, and we're suddenly seeing it from a perspective that enables us to see like two different frames in a movie, which are overlapping one on top of the other. And so, yeah, like all of those things are in my head in one way or another. Yeah, yes. Thank you, Nava.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we have time for one more question.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, thank you for a lovely presentation. And I was kind of curious. A lot of the images that you showed had to do with things falling apart and maybe entropy, I'm not sure. And I found the remarks you made about Jerusalem at the beginning and spirituality very, very moving. And I'm just kind of curious, as you look at the body of your work, I mean, how do you feel that being Jewish or being an Israeli or being both brings all of these things together? Because I just find that you really have an attraction to things falling apart.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say I spent some years studying abroad and living abroad. And at the time, I didn't feel a strong connection to Israel or to my own identity as coming from Israel. And the more time I spent living here, I think it's almost inevitable. Like artists respond to the place where they're working and their surroundings around them. And so obviously living in Israel has enhanced my connection to my Jewishness. And I think it's become more and more apparent in my work as well. And I used to be more ambivalent about it because I don't come from a religious background. I come from a secular background. So there was a question of, am I overstepping my boundaries, or am I stepping into an area where maybe I'm not invited or I'm unwelcome in this area? And I don't know, you just sort of have to do what feels natural to you. And you have to be the last person to censor your own work, needs to be you. And so I've connected more and more to these themes. And I actually find that I'm also like actively pursuing them more and more, to the extent that I actually had the thought, which might be outrageous, to actually show my work in a synagogue. It doesn't have to be like an active synagogue, but like the structure of the synagogue would actually, I thought, would be like an interesting context to show my work in. Yes, I've connected to that more and more. And again, it's a very profound way of thought, even if you don't take the religious parts of it. It's a very profound way of thinking and a very profound way of understanding the world. And that's something that I connect to very deeply.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to just tell you one thing. We're also big fans of Don Judd. And in connection with the Freeze Fair, which is on, which is live online this week, Flavin Judd is going to be doing a tour of Judd's prints on Friday. I didn't know if you knew about that, but he's going to be doing a live walkthrough of Judd's prints on Friday morning or Friday afternoon. But anyway,
Yes,
just thought I'd let you know.
He has a major show now at MoMA, which is closed, which is super unfortunate.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing
yeah, I would have loved to see it.
But the catalog is great, by the way. So
Okay.
you have a chance to see a lot of the work. Many things that have never been shown before. It's a wonderful show.
Yeah, and it's also, I've never seen him, like his work as just an independent show. I've always seen his work in like different collections, and there was always a quality to his work. Like he's not even Jewish, but there's something so Jewish about like this.
Right. And you need to go to Chinati. You have to go down to Texas.
Yeah, I wanna visit there for sure.
So I'll interrupt here and say we want to conclude and finish this conversation. Please feel free to stay. I would just say goodbye to those of us that want to stop here, and I will stop the Facebook Live with reminding you that the last talk of this series will be on the coming Sunday with Mirta Kufernik from Buenos Aires. It was a pleasure to be with you. It was a pleasure to speak with you, Yonatan. Thank you so much for taking the time. Please feel free to stay on the Zoom. I'm just cutting out the Facebook Live.